I'm just going to do a short intro in the event someone else ever sees this.
Yeah, go. We're live, so.
Okay, so my name is Tonelise Rugaas and I arrange retreats, and we have just completed a retreat called Stairway to Heaven in Joshua Tree, California. And as it is very important for people to be under the same roof and have conversations with each other and learn from each other, I'm here in my home with Peter Levenda. So we decided that we would have a under the same roof chat.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So Peter, why do you want to be in the same room with people and talk about stuff?
Why would I want to be in the same room? I primarily communicate through writing, and that's a one-way street. And when you're writing, you're just pronouncing. You're hoping you're reaching people. You hope they understand what you're talking about and the points you're trying to make, but you never really know. Sometimes being in a room with people, the feedback is immediate. Gestures, questions, reactions to statements that you make are easy to gauge, easier, and people will be forthright about asking you questions, asking you to clarify things, and that alone helps, especially if you're a writer, because you're never quite sure if you're saying the right things to the right audience that you're communicating. And when you're with a bunch of people, that helps from the writing perspective. I think a lot of writers don't do that normally. They'll do book signings, and that's sort of an artificial kind of contrived space. But when we had 5 days to interact with people, hours and hours every single day, it does something. It improves the writer, improves me. But what happens is there's more engagement, immediate engagement with things that you're saying, things that you maybe never thought to write. You're sort of forced into clarifying yourself from many different perspectives. If you have 20 or 30 people in a room and they're all looking at you and asking questions, and you're realizing what you're saying, how does it land? Am I making the right point? And sometimes they'll ask you questions that forces you to really think about what you're saying, to really think about what you've written as well, and to make sure that you clarify or even clarify it to yourself. So that's an immediate benefit from talking to people, being in a room with people. But the other part is there's a sense of community then suddenly that a writer doesn't necessarily feel on their own, writing from a room someplace, God knows where on the planet. The idea of community suddenly comes into sharp focus. And then you realize you're among people who kind of are on the same page as you are. Mm-hmm. And you actually see it at the time. You sense it in a way that you wouldn't before a long distance. You may get emails, you may get posts on social media, but those are awash with a whole bunch of other stuff. A lot of other posts, a lot of other social media comments and stuff. Suddenly it's all amorphous. You really don't know if the people that you want to reach are reached, and if they're getting it, and if they're enjoying what it is that they're hearing, or they find it valuable or not. That you do in a room with people. Yeah. There's community that way, and that's very important.
And that's also a two-way street. I had one guy, one attendee, who said to me in a quiet moment in a break, and he said, I came here for the lectures because he really admires your lectures, and also Marco Visconti, who was also lecturing throughout this. So he came for the lectures, and he said, but what I found was community. So it's a two-way street. This people can also show their enthusiasm, which must be fun for you. That's the part of that you don't see. Yes. Normally. And we were talking about we've spent 5 days exploring the notion of celestial ascent, and particularly with the starting point being the Big Dipper, that constellation in the sky, and how cultures all over the world has a relationship to this, and a relationship to the stars. And also interestingly, since we are one humanity, how the idea of ascending to the stars and merging with the heavenly seems to be the bedrock of all culture and religion. And this then being another way of uniting people through the subject matter. So I was wondering if you could just elaborate on that a little bit about what it means that something is that cross-cultural, what it means for us as a human species, what it means for our notion of humanity, our notion of equality, and the notion of being, dare I say it, a part of one giant organism together. So, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, that's something that's inspired me from the beginning about the idea of celestial ascent. In academia, they sort of frown upon drawing too many comparisons between different groups because they're afraid of not appreciating the differences culturally in each specific group. But by the same token, there are similarities. There is a bedrock kind of religion, if you want to call it that, or spirituality might be a better word.
Yeah.
Today we would call it religion, spirituality, but back in prehistoric times, or at least the earliest recorded history, let's put it that way, there was no real difference between a religion, spirituality, science, and community. It was all one thing. Mm-hmm. And what is interesting to find is that all around the world, from the earliest times that we can find, cultures had a sense of spirituality that was focused on the stars, that was focused on traveling to or visiting the stars, what we call celestial ascent. The idea that there were some people, individuals in the community, who were either better trained or had a better understanding or an instinctive ability to make that voyage, to ascend to the stars in the sense that there was a permeable barrier between this world and the next world that they could penetrate, they could see it, they could come back to their people with insights that they gained from that particular experience. Now that seems like it's very unique to one group of people. For instance, Siberian shamanism, as Mircea Eliade had written about in his famous first book, Shamanism. But it turns out that if you look at the Shangqing Taoists, for instance, in China, you look at people practicing in India, in North Africa, in Sub-Saharan Africa, all over the world, in the Americas as well. Everybody had this concept. Everybody looked to rising on the stars, to going into the heavens, to actually traveling there for some benefit, for some enlightenment, for some grace, maybe. So that this became a universal. I mean, this is what I found to be virtually a universal practice, with cultural differences, of course, based upon environment, based upon language, based upon the history of that particular peoples, but everyone seemed to have this. The pharaohs being prepared after death to travel to the stars. In ancient Sumer, they built temples to talk to the stars. They would say, "Spirit of the sky, remember us." There was this idea that there was some potent power that resided in space, in the stars, in the constellations themselves, that inspired people, that drew people up out of their world briefly to see another perspective on their lives, their cultures, their problems, to address questions of illness. For instance, these shamans who would ascend to the stars would come back as healers. Mm-hmm. They would come back as diviners. They would try to understand the situations of their particular community, whether it was political, whether it was agricultural, ecological. They came back with this extra information, this extra understanding. And it turns out that's pretty universal. The idea of going to the stars and coming back with information turned out to be kind of universal, and that said to me, this is the original religion. All religions since then were sort of building upon this. And as academic types are discovering even now, it looks as though that maybe as late as the 1st century CE, with St. Paul talking about going to the third heaven, this idea that he had performed celestial ascent and come back down and basically created Christianity on the back of those experiences. Those experiences were known to the Jewish mystics as well. So, and where was that based on? The Jewish mystics, some of their language came from Babylonia. Some of the language came from Egypt. So there was a continuum of experience that was handed down through thousands of years, from pre-literate societies or non-literate societies around the world to some of the most famous civilizations that you read about in the history books when you're in school. There was this continuum of practice, this continuum of understanding that was there, that was kind of guarded because it was a little dangerous. It was solitary. It requires a certain degree of self denial, whether it was fasting or a solitary practice in the forest, in the woods, in the desert. We read in the Gospels of Jesus going into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights and encountering the devil there, who promised him all sorts of things. And then he would come back again with his messages and with his transmission of spiritual guidance to the people. That was a kind of shamanic thing. We don't look at it that way. We're not used to thinking in those terms. But you're going to the desert for 40 days in a solitary way, and you come back and you have all of these ideas. That's shamanism. That was how we defined it among the Siberian shamans that Mircea Eliade wrote about, and in practices that exist to this day in Alaska, in northern Siberia, in different parts of South America as well. Sometimes aided and abetted with the use of drugs or hallucinogens under very controlled circumstances. Sometimes it was just fasting. It was being solitary. It was being alone in the forest with no one else to talk to, until suddenly you're getting visions, you're getting a kind of hallucination experience, and it's a breakthrough experience, as it would be with, DMT or something like that, although without the drugs. And this breakthrough happens, and then suddenly you see things differently. You come back and you've seen the world from a different perspective, and it's a divinely inspired one. It's an incredibly uplifting experience you're coming back with. You value things you did not value before. You see them in their spiritual state, and this enables you to communicate to your people, your clan, your tribe, your community. We kind of lost this in Western civilization, particularly in the last couple of 100 years.
Yeah. We have this idea also about a ladder to the stars, and there's the notion of Jacob's ladder. There's the notion of the 7 levels, the seven heavens, the 7 stars, and I don't want to be too technical, but the 7 stars in the Big Dipper. And it's also going to our language. So he was feeling great. He was in 7th heaven, which basically is a way to express that. The man or the woman was feeling bliss. But do you think this is kind of like, it's the practical application of this can be a little bit more difficult for modern people, given that we live in a world that has so much light pollution that 98% of people on this planet hasn't even seen the Milky Way. So if you live in a city, you don't really see stars. Everything becomes a little bit more abstract for you. And do you feel that some of these ideas have been lost because we have altered our planet so much? So instead, what we're doing now, we seem to be compartmentalizing a lot. We're forgetting that we're one humanity. You have the Masons with their traditions. You have the Christians with their traditions, the Muslims with their traditions, and the Taoists here, and the faith there, and even infighting in amongst faiths. So do you think that this compartmentalization and the loss of the sense of one world, one man, one humanity might have something to do with what we actually have done to this planet?
Completely agree. I mean, the idea of specialization and compartmentalization of knowledge, which is what the 20th century, 21st century pretty much relied upon for their technological advances, meant that we broke ourselves off into little pieces. So we have a category in our head. There's religion is in one box, and science is in another box, and our job in another box, and on and on and on and on. And there's thousands of boxes in our lives. We don't see a unity. We don't see we don't have an overall goal anymore. We're too seduced by technology. For instance, technology is very seductive. You can spend hours scrolling through Instagram. You're not getting anywhere with that. But it's like a drug, a kind of a quick fix that wastes a lot of time, and at the end of it, you've achieved virtually nothing. So there's that problem. Light pollution from cities, yes, because since we stopped looking at the stars, we forgot they were there.
Yeah.
And because we forgot they were there, we forgot there was a path upward. We can't find Jacob's ladder anymore because of that, which was what was so valuable about the last 5 days out here in Joshua Tree, was that we were out there in nature. There was very little light pollution. We looked straight up and we saw the stars.
Yeah.
And there's an important message to that, and that is that regardless of what people will tell you, what organizations and churches tell you, the stars are up there visible for all of us. I mean, we have a direct line to that. Nobody can stop in the middle for us and stop us from looking up, no matter what they tell you, no matter what kind of rules they put around it, or what kind of regulations, or what kind of ideologies they're giving you. All you have to do is go outside and just look up, and you realize that you have a direct connection. You're able to do this yourself. You're able to look at the stars and dream. What does that mean? What did our ancestors see? Because our ancestors spent a lot of time lying on their backs looking up. They recorded the movements of the stars, or the movements of the planets, with meticulous detail, even as early as Babylon, with the cuneiform texts, where they're keeping track of all of this. They had names for the constellations, different from ours quite often, but they had names of the constellations, they had names for the planets, they had specific math that was involved in each case, the arcs that were described by the planets. All of this was already there with people who had no technology at all. The technology that we have should enable us to do so much more this way, but we take it for granted. We don't even look. We don't even bother to understand what's up there. So the ancients did it, and they valued that relationship that they had with the stars. And with those people who were able to actually record them, see them, and then eventually travel up Jacob's ladder from the Old Testament, from the works of the Jews of the 6th, 7th centuries, maybe BCE. But this was something that people did take for granted. They spoke about it normally. Jacob's ladder, the third heaven to Paul, the seventh heaven to the other, the Jewish mystics. This was something that, I mean, even in Islam, the Prophet took a voyage to the seven heavens. It's called the ceremony, the night journey that he took, that led from Mecca and Medina to Jerusalem, then from Jerusalem straight up the seven heavens, and then all the way back down, where he met all the various prophets. And what was happening was the various prophets gave him information, and he brought this information back. That's a shamanic journey that you will find in many cultures around the world. It's almost a requirement to do that. So we have the ability, I think, the value of Joshua Tree is we got away from a lot of the technology as much as we could. We were still there with our phones, and we're still there, recording stuff.
Yeah.
But we did go outside. That's a very important thing.
But even
go
then,
outside.
Even then, you have to make a choice. We did a stargazing event yesterday, when astronomer comes around. There's a telescope involved in it. People are watching the stars, and he's pointing at them with his pointer, his little laser pointer, and it's interesting. But even then, I found myself, I had to walk around to a few people, and because they are standing under the stars with an astronomer who's pointing at the stars, and they were looking at them on their phones.
Yes.
And I had to say, please put that away.
Mm-hmm.
This here is the interface,
right.
that the only interface you need to look at the stars. But they're not clear. And I was like, they're not clear because your eyes are light sensitive. You've been looking at a bright screen.
Precisely.
You've been looking into the artificial light. So we who live out here in the wilderness and maybe operate a little bit more intimately with and through it, and including the heavens, we know how to do this. This is the advice everybody will give you. Look into the darkness, the darkest part you can see around you, for about 15 seconds. Get your eyes used to the darkness, then look up, and then you will not need light.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's counterintuitive as well. You want to look at something, so you want to put light to it, but you cannot do it with a night sky.
Right.
People go out in the wilderness with headlamps. That's going to destroy your entire experience. Yeah. And that kind of leads me to a little bit of a question to you about our fear of the dark, which we have because we have such access to light in our modern world. I'm willing to bet that the ancients didn't fear the dark so much because they were used to it. They were intimately used to it because they couldn't just flick a switch and there was light, Right. So even staring into the darkness for 15 seconds is a lot for people. Mm-hmm. They are used to an illuminated world with artificial light. And here you are trying to teach people about a completely different illumination that you seem to find in darkness.
Exactly. Right.
So that's just a little observation, and I just want to kind of segue from that into other things, you know, that we spoke about. For, you know, you wrote about all of this in Stairway to Heaven in your book, which is brilliant. I have a very special edition of it here, and it's a fantastic little book, and it's about exactly what you've been explaining about, you know, about the Big Dipper, the different cultures that we can use these ideas, these notions. We can literally use the night sky to be united as humankind in a divisive world, if we are willing to come together and do that. But you know, you also have a very long authorship behind you. You're a very prolific author, and you've written about a lot of other things, and a lot of people know you through the UFO and UAP scene, if there's such a thing. And the way you approached it, that here was really interesting to me, because that's kind of a little bit out of my wheelhouse. When you were talking about the phenomena and refusing to name it, instead of referring to it as them, they, you know, it's the phenomenon. It's just something that goes on, that we are a part of, that might be ultra-terrestrial, extraterrestrial, or it might belong on this planet. But for us, it's the unknown. And what you were talking about is how that also weaves into the way we see the stars, the way we see our planet, the way we see each other, and the way we see the heavens. So I was wondering if you could tell me more about the phenomenon, because that's interesting stuff.
Yeah, we started, when I say we, going back to Tom DeLonge and back in 2015 when we first started this journey where the UFO situation is concerned, we always just simply referred to it as the phenomenon. And the reason why is because we weren't just talking about flying saucers, we weren't just talking about aliens or anything like that, because quite frankly, we don't know what this is. So calling it the phenomenon was a kind of a shorthand way, that was a catch-all term. There's people in the UFO community who think in the nuts and bolts category, so they want to see flying saucers, right? How does that technology work? But we don't have enough information even on what a flying saucer, so-called a UFO, what it really looks like, because there's so many different visions of it, there's so many different impressions of it. They're round discs, no, they're tic-tac shaped, no, they're amorphous, they're things with tentacles that fly through the air, you know.
Cigar shaped.
Cigar shaped, there's all kinds of shapes. So how can you talk about propulsion? You don't even know where to begin with the shape. So people have seen all of these things. I do not doubt it. I mean, I was 100% on board with the UFO phenomenon stuff long before I got involved with Tom DeLonge, because I said, well, the data is there. If you look at the records of even the government records, it's replete with these stories, but they don't match. They're seeing something. Everybody is seeing something in the sky that's there that shouldn't be there. Maybe, I mean, according to our lights, it shouldn't be there. So that's there, and then there's another aspect to this, which is the consciousness aspect.
Yes.
And it's something that Jacques Vallée started pointing out, and John Keel. They're sort of in the same wheelhouse where this is concerned. And the idea that there's a consciousness aspect here. What if what we're seeing is a kind of mirage? You know, it's something that's triggering something in our minds, but it's not really there the way we think it's there. Even if we can photograph it as we have, and take in video of it as we have, there could be a technology in which we can materialize ideas so that they're kind of tangible for a fleeting moment. We take their pictures, right? That's the phenomenon. Alien abduction, right? Alien contact, whatever that is. I mean, I've known a number of people who've had that experience, and they're people that are not, you know, insane. They're not put away somewhere. One of them happens to be a former, you know, high-ranking member of the CIA, and he's talked about this. Jim Semivan has talked about this in podcasts and in interviews. Here was a guy with a long history at CIA, and he and his wife at one point were abducted, and it caused a great stir among the people in our government, right? I mean, could be a terrible security problem when you have somebody with that kind of background being abducted by aliens.
Obviously.
I mean, abducted by the Soviets is one thing, abducted by the Chinese, but abducted by something in the middle of the night that goes through walls, you know, and of course Whitley Strieber being the famous abductee and contactee. So that comes under the same category because there's a space connection there as well.
Yeah.
There's this astral, to use another term, an astral connection, a connection with the stars. So it's the phenomenon. We can't define it yet. To put a fine point on it and call it a UFO even is too much, is just too fine a point. To call it a flying saucer obviously is too fine a point. It's aerial phenomena, yeah, but it also happens in your house,
Yeah.
right?
On the land.
It happens
It's
on the
everywhere.
land, on the ocean.
I've heard a lot of different theories about this as well, and some people would claim that no, this has nothing to do with extraterrestrial beings. What if it's a rift in time?
Right.
Of course it can be. You know.
Of course, and what do all those things mean?
Yeah, well, exactly. We
Yeah.
don't know what it means, but our brains are, you know, we make our machines with steel and rivets,
Right.
and they're solid. So clearly, that's our vantage point.
Mhm.
So, what if these things are not even machines? What if they are life forms? And there are so many theories here, and I would take a step back basically, because let's say for argument's sake that these are things that actually do visit us. So, who's the primitive species here? Well, clearly we are.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe for once, instead of trying to define absolutely everything, it would be a good idea to sit back and be introduced to it,
Right.
and patiently wait for you know, a window of opportunity where that could be.
Well, the point that we were making in the Secret Machines book is that, you know, just as we're talking about celestial ascent as being a kind of universal around the world, we think that our culture as human beings, our overall culture, is the result of contact that may have taken place in prehistory. You know, the idea that we're a cargo cult, that our entire planet, the way we think, the way we operate now, even considering celestial ascent, is part of some contact that was made with us a long time ago. This is speculation, obviously, but it kind of fits. It fits the myths. It fits the stories that we've heard from all over the world, the ancient stories, right? The ancient stories of gods coming down from the sky. We have a 20th century version of that in the cargo cults. So there were people living, pre-literate societies, living in the South Pacific Islands, and Westerners or technological civilizations, the British in one particular case, the Japanese, the Americans, were carving landing strips out of the jungle, right? Because they were going to have places to resupply their planes for warfare. And so they would clear out some jungle, make a landing strip, and these cargo planes would land. And out of these cargo planes, all these goodies would come out, you know, all kinds of boxes of stuff and medicines and supplies and ammunition and weapons and even vehicles, right? Trucks, tractors, all kinds of stuff would come out of there. And these pre-literate people are staring at this. Planes came from out of the side. Vehicles, they didn't have a word for plane. They didn't have a word for aircraft. Came down, landed, and stuff was coming out. And then they would go back up again and come back down. So the people seeing this then went and did likewise, and they carved landing strips in the jungle. And they created control towers out of wood and bamboo, right? Trying to summon the planes to land for them and give them the good stuff also. What if we, as a species, are at this point a cargo cult? Because we're looking to the heavens. We want to travel to the heavens. We want to go off planet. We're looking for immortality. We're looking for longevity. We're trying to do all these things that, you know, our ancient ancestors wanted to do. They wanted to live forever. They wanted the key to immortality. They wanted to travel to the stars. Now we're doing it. We're doing exactly that, based upon this ancient desire to do that, which might have been instigated by some form of contact. Our known history, and that we're in a dangerous area there because we keep coming up stuff that's older than we think it should be.
Yeah.
But we go back maybe 20,000 years as quote-unquote civilization, but we've been on the planet for 250,000 years as Homo sapiens. So what were we doing all that time? We were just wandering around. We were happy as clams, and then suddenly something lands, and just changes our entire perspective. We begin to look at the sky as a place to go or as a place to come from, and we start to think about all these other things we think about now. Right? We are getting to that close position where we are. We are the cargo cult. You know, we're getting closer and closer to the point where that phenomenon is going to be us. We're getting closer to the point of we're in the sky now for the first time. In 20,000 years of recorded history, we've only been up in the sky for about 100 years.
Yeah.
We actually went there. We went where we thought we would never go. And now we're crowding the place with satellites and aircraft and everything, and missiles and all
Wherever
sorts of
we
stuff.
go, we leave trash.
We leave trash, a lot of it. So there we are, right? We're already up there. We're becoming the phenomenon. We're becoming the unidentified flying objects. We have them. We have drones now. We don't know if they're ours, theirs, or theirs. We don't know where these freaking things are coming from. They're closing airports in Europe as we speak. They're closing airports all over the place. People are getting nervous. They don't know where they're coming from. We're at the point where we can't tell our craft from the phenomenon. So we're getting close to the point where there's going to be a crossover between this. We're becoming the phenomenon, slowly but surely. And consciousness is a very important aspect of all of this. Our consciousness will change, will open up in response to this, I believe.
Well, I would hope so. That the thing with us right now, we've gone through a complete quantum leap, I feel, as a species. It used to be quite an effort and a choice to communicate with each other. You used to have to wait for a letter to arrive in the post, and even before the printing press, people didn't have access to literature the way we do now. And so every time we invent something that makes it easier for us to communicate, it's a quantum shift, because everything is access to information. And in a way, the internet, which everyone with access to a smartphone, which is most people on Earth, have access to, is a way, the physical manifestation of the Jung's collective unconscious. And there we are in the middle of it, and we're thrown into this unconscious, and you find stuff there that you would find in any kind of murky unconscious situation, good stuff, bad stuff, our good sides, our bad sides, and it's all mixed up in there. We're trying to make sense of it. And do you feel that us having been propelled into this so quickly, because this has just happened in the last 50 years of human development, which is nothing in the big picture, is one of the reasons that we tend to isolate ourselves from other and become more divided, which is basically an oxymoron, because these things should be able to connect us more. And it looks like it's become tools to divide us and isolate us from each other, and hence we lose the notion of that we are a part of something bigger, which is the phenomenon. Because obviously if the phenomenon is there, we're a part of it.
Sure.
Because we are travelers in this universe.
Yeah. But what the internet has done, it's kind of ironic. In the old days, in the pre-internet days,
1980s.
1980s, yes. Governments might be enemies with each other. Religious groups might be enemies with each other, as we know throughout history. But now with the internet, individuals are enemies with each other. We've internalized this entire global process, so now it's us against each other on the internet, complaining about this one and complaining about that one, and having our opinions, as ill-informed as they may be, then broadcast to the entire world, part of the enormous human general unconsciousness that is the internet. So we've internalized some of the worst parts of our history, and maybe that's a mirror that we're holding to our face. Maybe this is a time for us to reflect, no pun intended, on that mirror image, and to realize that, this is not the way to go. We were satisfied if our government was at war with some other government someplace else. The Cold War, I grew up during the Cold War, so you had the United States and you had the Soviet Union, at loggerheads. But you didn't have Americans. Well, you always had people fighting with each other, but you didn't have it so easy. that you could just get online and insult absolutely everybody you know and people you've never met in any part of the world, right? Whether it was your next door neighbor or somebody on the other side of the globe. So you're being forced to deal with the consequences of that. That division now has become internalized to the point where it's you divided against me against the guy next door, as opposed to government against government or religion against religion. So we're going to have to come to terms with this. This is going to be our initiation into the next phase of this process, that we have to realize what it is that we're doing. We're going to be, at some point, it's going to be too much, and we're going to have had enough of it. And we're going to be forced to clean up our act, not by government dictate, not by laws and regulations, but simply because of our behavior, because it is suicidal, and we're going to have to get past it. But we have created a kind of large unconsciousness, and we realize that the human unconscious has those pitfalls in it. Our individual unconscious mind, there are problems in there, right?
Yeah.
We discussed that during these last 5 days, that you can try to make contact yourself. You can try to undergo a spiritual process to see how far you can go, and you're going to be confronted with things within your own unconscious mind that you were not aware of or not ready to contemplate. So you're going to have to deal with that process, deal with that information first. And our internet is that. Our internet has all sorts of stuff in there that we didn't know existed. We didn't know how people could be so evil or so stupid in many cases, so ridiculous in their interpretations and their ideas. Not because they're not like ours, but because they don't make any sense in general. So we have to work through that. I think this unconscious mind that we've created is not pure information. It's poisoned in some cases by attitudes, by approaches.
So wherever we go, we leave trash.
We leave trash, exactly.
Even in our mind.
Exactly. And
So,
that's the problem, I think, with AI as well.
yeah.
AI is being created from a certain perspective. And it's a perspective that has inherent flaws in it, because we think this information is good and this information is bad, or this information is irrelevant based upon our perspective. The people creating this AI, which is now fueling the internet, is people with certain ideas as to what information is valuable and what isn't. And that's a cultural, even genderized, I might say, perspective on what is really information or what is real knowledge. This is important and this isn't. That's built into the programs. And I wrote about this in Secret Machines. This is a problem. It's built in. And we're going to be the victims of our own invention in this case.
So when you say certain ideas, who do you have in mind? The creators of AI?
Well, I mean, I can't point my fingers at individual names because the creators are, nameless people. That's part of the problem, right? But they may be people from a Western technological, cultural context that is determining what's valuable, what is actually relevant. AI is kind of framed that way. When you start dealing with AI and asking it questions, you're going to get some very strange answers. If you're a person of a different culture, a different language background, a different historical background, you're going to be taught, well, as we all know, the winners determine the history books, right?
I'm just going to say it. Most of them are white men.
Yeah, okay, there you go.
Yeah, so you don't have to.
Okay, good, thank you. But
uh,
white male, yes, like me. So you have white men who actually are in charge of that, and that's wrong. I mean,
also white men of a certain age and they tend to be a bit, they tend to be relatively young and coming from a particular socioeconomic background.
right.
And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with any human being, but when you have one group defining what reality is, it's time to maybe sit up and question that.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's the problem I have with AI, and then with the internet, in general, is a struggle. Which is why, if I just jump in, something like what we've just did over the 5 days was like the anti-internet, right?
Yeah.
It was just us one-on-one as people, as human beings, making that connection without having to go to our machines and our devices and send each other, emails asking each other questions. People came up and asked me questions directly. They asked each other. We were right there in one room. And if there was a bias, if there was a prejudice, if there was bad information or just the wrong perspective, everybody would see it right away, right? And they would ask questions and challenge a specific point of view. That challenging happened on an equal field, right? An even field. We were all equal in that situation. You know, if you bullshit somebody, they're going to know it. They're going to see it right away.
But there was no argument.
There was no argument. I mean,
it was done in a friendly manner.
Exactly.
It's very difficult to be unfriendly to people you are sitting next to.
Exactly. Sure is, right.
So what can we do you think, as humans? I wouldn't say bring back, because you know there's this notion that everything has to go back to the past and we have to make everything great again, and that's a very specific trapping on its own. But what can we do to move forward as humankind, remembering who we are, that we are beings that are more or less designed to be together, and so that we don't let technology divide us, but we let it unite us and makes us more, you know, maybe prepared to do the Stairway to Heaven, for celestial ascent, and maybe then commune and merge with this thing that is bigger than all of us, as shared with every culture ever. What can we do? Because, you know, people might feel a little bit powerless.
They are, as individuals, they're beginning to realize, sitting at their devices and going online, they feel free to vent as much as they can, but they can change nothing that way, right? It just makes them feel good for a second, and then after that, the experience is gone, it's over. They're not doing it, they're not accomplishing anything. They need to be in the same room. This is something that really has to happen. The idea of using the internet to solve our problems, we know now, that ain't gonna happen. You know, it's not really it's a great source of information. You can download files, you know, you can read them and maybe understand them. But once you start interacting with people on that level, you're just talking to machines. You're not talking to human beings. You're not looking in their eyes and calling them names, right?
Yeah.
Or trying to challenge them and say you're stupid or you're this. When you're with people, it's different. What did they tell Neo in the very beginning of the Matrix, right? Unplug. You know, you've got to unplug. And in a way, that's necessary. You have to unplug. This is not healthy, boys and girls. This idea of just being, you know, fixated on these screens. You have to know by now. You must feel it. You must know it. This is not very good. Find community. Community exists everywhere if you look for it, or create it, right? Find the friends. If you're using the internet, find the people in your area that seem to believe the same you do.
Invite them for dinner.
Invite them for dinner, right? We don't have the COVID thing, right, to worry about so much anymore. Maybe we do, I don't know. But wear your mask then, whatever. But build the community, right? Find out where these people are. I mean, we did it here, and people came from all over the place to come here for this.
People flew in.
They flew in.
To over continents to be together for 5 days. And
you see how valuable that is. You know, and you could do that in your own community. You don't need to fly anywhere to do that, right? I'm sure there's a lot of people, probably on the street where you live, who are of like minds that you are, wherever it happens to be, whether it's celestial ascent or, you know, the phenomenon or anything else, you know, macrame, it doesn't matter, something. Build the community, look at people in the eye. You know, you're not being brave when you're handling it through the devices. That's not bravery, that's not courage. You know, there's no moral high ground that you're taking in a case like that. When you have to look at people, you know, one-on-one, not only does it mollify everyone a little bit, you learn things.
I think it's okay to, you know, do classes through the internet and all of that stuff, because, you know, one shouldn't underestimate our connectedness in so far that it's a great source of sharing information. But like celestial ascent, you also have the idea of descent, which from what I understood from what you were talking about, unless I've got this completely wrong, you know, you can have ascent, but ascent is again meaningless without a certain descent.
Exactly.
So maybe, you know, if you don't have access where you are to go and learn stuff in a room, it's fine to take classes, but then for goodness sake, find someone to share it with, right, and use that as a way of descent, and you know, one might find friends in the interim, you know, which is gold dust.
Sure. And I think what happened here at Joshua Tree this week was like that. A community was created, kind of people who didn't really know each other before, but they were united in this common idea, and they realized that everybody had something very valuable to contribute from their own perspectives. And you need that corrective, right? Otherwise, you're in your own head. You think you know it all. You think you can answer all the questions. You don't need any help. You do. I do. Everybody does. You need the help from that community.
Then again, you know, we live in a world now where, oh, it's terrible, it's so divided, it's never been worse than this, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, if you ask people who's lived almost 100 years, I'm pretty certain they would argue that that's not necessarily correct. And you know, we no longer go on, you know, it's no longer family entertainment, you know, to go and see somebody be hung, drawn and quartered. You know, animals have rights now in parts of the world, most parts of the world even, and there are less famine than ever. There are more access to education than ever, particularly for young girls and women. And there are more people have roofs over their head and fewer people go hungry.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, we've never really had it as good. But then, you know, we connect ourselves to this machine brain that tells us that it's shit, you know. So I'll let you say, because you kind of ended on that note as well when we were together here in Joshua Tree at the Joshua Tree Retreat Center from, and you pulled out True Detective, the last scene there. So why did you do that, and what is that scene?
Yeah, for those who haven't seen it, and I strongly recommend you watch True Detective Season 1 if you haven't. But the final scene is two of the lead characters. One of them is extremely depressed. He thinks that there's just basically no hope. The other character is trying to get him out of that mind frame, and they're looking up at the night sky, you know. And Russ Cole looks up at the night sky and he says, you know, it's all darkness, it's all blackness, you know. Nothing ever changes. It's the same story. It's just one story over and over again. And that at a certain point, Russ Cole looks up and says, you know, no, basically, you know, you're wrong. He was talking to his partner. He says, you're wrong, you know, there's more. It started as darkness, but there's a lot of stars now. The light is winning. And I like that. I mean, they were talking about the stars, looking up at the stars when they were kids, the stories they would say about the stars. Isn't that the beginning of our celestial ascent experience, right? As kids looking up at the sky and seeing the stars and wondering what all of that was all about. And that's just like a normal, everyday, all around the world, kids looking up at the sky when they can see the sky and making up stories about the stars. That's what our ancestors did. And then coming to the conclusion that maybe there's more stars, maybe we can see more, maybe the light is winning against the darkness. That's a very deep, you know, a very profound statement, I thought, especially for the end of that particular television program. So for me, the message and what I was trying to say is we are bringing down this information from the stars also. It's not just about going up, it's about coming down and helping your community with what you've seen, what you've experienced. This is where it's at, you know, this is where the community comes in. The individual goes up and he comes down and becomes part of a community. Suddenly a community is created around this knowledge, this information. You go up as an individual, but you don't come down as the same person at all. You come down as somebody who understands their importance, their role in the community and the importance of the community to that individual. It becomes very reciprocal. This is something that I think we kind of discussed during the last 5 days. We discussed what our roles are, what we can do to contribute to each other. That's what this is all about. This is what we're trying to achieve, from everything from celestial ascent to talking about the phenomenon, to all of it. There's a community built into all of this. There's a sense of belonging to the planet and to each other that's built into this. As human beings, we're going to have to amend our consciousness to the point where we accept each other and value each other. We made a point about how should we call it? Valuing everyone's genetic contribution, right? The idea that we need biodiversity on the planet. We've destroyed so much of the Amazon rainforest, for instance. As a matter of fact, this is not something that's political. We've destroyed a lot of the Amazon rainforest, and as we've done so, we've destroyed plants that we'll never see again. Plants that may have had medicines, plants that may have been useful for curing illness. We just don't have them anymore. And our point was, and the point we tried to make during these last 5 days, is that the same is true of genetics. The same is true of people. We have to value all the people on the planet because, number one, biodiversity and genetic diversity. There may be genes that are stronger, more resilient in some cases than others. By restricting ourselves to the study of just ourselves, whether it's white European people or whether it's Asians or whatever it happens to be, we are restricting our own perspective of the value of the gene pool. We need everybody's genetic complement here. We need people who have specific types of growth that we don't understand, that we don't know. And consciousness can be part of that too, because we now come...
It likely is.
It likely is. So we come to the next part of why we need people. How are we going to understand the phenomenon without the input from everyone? We, white males like me, we don't have a monopoly on this, far from it. We are as much in the dark as anybody else. So what we need is the benefit of everybody sitting down and communicating to each other culturally. What are cultural attitudes towards celestial ascent, as an example? What are cultural attitudes towards religion in general, or towards consciousness, towards science? There's different sciences out there, right? We've dominated science for so long that we forget that there's other people taking different approaches to what might be science. The question of consciousness, the question of the unified theory. All of this, we may need inputs from people who have different perspectives based upon their ethnicities, their environment where they grew up, based on linguistic differences. There are languages that have words for stuff we don't have words for in English. And that's part of the problem of artificial intelligence. It's based on English for the large part, not taking into consideration shades of meaning. There's Japanese words for stuff that we don't have words for. There's German words. There's freaking Welsh words for stuff that we don't have words for.
I'm Norwegian. I often find that we have words for stuff that is not in English and vice versa.
Yeah.
So B, ascend, unify, and create community.
Yes.
That's a little thing. Because maybe, we are individuals, we are ourselves, and that's true. Or maybe that's the biggest illusion as well, because when you peel away that layer, then you are a part of humanity, and that is true. But that's also just the start of it.
Right.
You peel that away, you're part of a consciousness, and then you peel that away, and you're part of everything that ever was, is, and will ever be. And in that sense, people's input are integral to the understanding of this, and also the understanding of what the phenomenon is, because we are, if you peel all of this away, we are the phenomenon. So looking inside ourselves, you were talking about the mirror, but that's more looking at ourselves and arguing with ourselves, but looking inside ourselves to find that nugget that is universality in life. Maybe if we dare to just poke it, we can create something where there is space for everything that is in a more peaceful fashion.
Yeah, I think that if we solve the problem of consciousness, which we seem on the verge of doing, and we realize that consciousness exists outside of ourselves, that we're transmitters and receivers of consciousness, we're going to suddenly realize that the consciousness of a Trobriand islander or the consciousness of a Mayan lady in Yucatan is all part of that consciousness.
Maybe that's a great place to end. It's all a part of the consciousness. So, okay. Well, it's been a pleasure having you as a guest in my home here. It's been amazing to have you as a guest on Stairway to Heaven, and I'm very happy you enjoyed it, because not everything can be done in an email.
Sure.
And there will be more 5 days, but we will continue to try to put people in the same room, and it's been an absolute undivided joy and pleasure to have had a chance to have riveting conversations with you. Thank you.
The pleasure was all mine, really. Thank you very much.
Okay. Right, I think we're done here.
Good work.